Welcome to another episode of Down the Block and Back. I am your host, Frank Maurice, and you are watching Ratchet and Frank TV. We made some really good progress last episode on the hot side of the engine, so let's jump over to the cold side of the engine. We'll start with the crankcase ventilation module. This module actually has a moving part in the bottom of it, so it gets its own oil supply, and just like everything else, this line loves to freeze up, so we'll grab some penetrating oil, grab a wrench and give it a whirl. It won't pop loose by hand, so I'm going to reach for the handy piece of Charlotte pipe, make a little bit of leverage, and we'll make this thing look easy. If things do end up going south here, nothing actually usually breaks. What happens is the collar nut strips out, and at that point you're going to have to get a pair of vice grips and mangle the thing in order to get it out. Very rarely do I see the actual line break off. Just like a frozen bolt, if these lines stick up on you, work them back and forth. Before you go one direction, it'll usually pop it loose. You guys totally seen me do this before. These lines never come out, but a good tap or three with a wrench and a little shake usually frees them right up. This is the older style crankcase ventilation module unit. There's only 3 bolts that mount this to the block. We'll have to take them all out right now. There's also a spacer plate in between the block and the module. We'll remove that as well. There's a vent tube underneath the CCV module that goes directly to the atmosphere. It's P-clamped to the block. We'll remove the P-clamp, and this will free the module up entirely. With the module off the engine, we're going to turn our attention towards the fuel filter housing. The first thing to do is remove the line that returns fuel from the cylinder head to the fuel filter housing. Once again, this line would not budge, so we're going to opt not to punch the engine block at full speed, reach for a piece of pipe, get a little bit of leverage, break the line loose, then finish it back off with our wrench. I'm just noticing now that this clip is actually backwards, and I probably should have done the overflow valve at the top of the cylinder head before I went ahead and did this, because then that line wouldn't have spun like that, but whatever, it's too late. This is the overflow valve at the top of the cylinder head. It returns fuel back to the filter housing, and this is also where you run your clear line test if you wanted to check for air in your fuel stream after the injectors. Try to always take the sealing washers with you when you remove the banjo bolt. It's a good thing to do, especially if you're doing field repairs, because a lot of the times when you drop one of those, it's a lot easier to replace it than find it lost in the dirt. When this engine is in frame, these P-clamps can be quite a pain to remove, especially this one under the intake manifold. While the harness is in place, it covers it up completely. On the opposite side of the filter housing, you'll find the banjo with the line that's responsible for feeding the cylinder head with the fuel needed. For right now, I'm just going to remove the banjo and leave it hanging in its P-clamps, so that way I could focus on removing the filter housing. The filter housing is a standalone piece, unlike the oil filter housing, which mounts to the engine block directly and has a gasket behind it. The housing uses 3 bolts to hold it to the engine block. All of them are pretty easy to access while in frame as well. Before we go any further, I'd like to give a word to the sponsor for this season of Down the Block and Back. Ridemore Heavy Duty Truck Parts is one of the largest used heavy-duty demanufacturing facilities specializing in quality used parts for commercial trucks Class 7 and 8. If you do a lot of your own work on your trucks and you're tired of spending a lot of money on brand new parts when you don't necessarily need something that's brand new, definitely give Ridemore a look and check out their website or give them a call at 978-342-1100. Whether it's new, used, or remanufactured truck parts you're looking for, Ridemore has you covered. On the newer filter housings, there's actually a notch that assists with installation. You could just rest the filter housing on, and you don't have to remove the bolt entirely. The rear gear train of this engine drives a low-pressure pump to push fuel up through the tank through this line into the filter housing, where it's then carried to the cylinder head and converted to high pressure, then atomized via the unit injectors. Besides it being interesting, the reason I'm telling you this is because we'll have to remove this line now to expose that back right bolt on the filter housing. I'm trying to remove as few lines as possible when I'm taking this off the engine, not only because it's faster, but it's also a lot easier. It's funny because if you were doing this in frame, you'd probably opt to do the opposite and only remove the lines from the filter housing side, leaving most everything attached. This engine incorporates late 2000s, early modern emissions equipment. This is the actuation solenoid that controls the fuel shutoff valve on the AHI module. As opposed to removing it from the bracket, we'll remove the entire bracket from the side of the engine block. This is one of the old school AHI modules. It serves to control the flow of fuel towards the 7th injector, which heats up the exhaust gas stream during the regeneration process. You can see this fuel is starting to become thicker. This is what happens to diesel fuel over time. Same thing as the solenoid from earlier. Instead of removing the module from the bracket, we'll remove the entire bracket with the module attached from the engine. We're also going to remove all the P-clamps that are remaining on the engine block. This is the low pressure fuel pump I had mentioned from before. In order to save space, this engine combines the power steering pump and the fuel pump into a single tandem unit driven off of the same single gear on the rear train. On the top left side of the cylinder head, you'll find the line responsible that feeds the head galleys with fuel, which in turn gets delivered to the unit injectors. With everything freed up, we'll slip that bundle of fuel lines out between the corner of the air compressor and the intake manifold. This is all we're going to be doing for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time.